webinars and meetings within the regenerative movement, have you noticed that it's clearly female kind of led?
That's something that I've noticed. I don't know if any of my other team members want to speak up.
Yeah, I don't feel like I've noticed that either. I think it's awesome the amount of female presence there is, but definitely both.
I don't know, I've done these courses with Laura Stone, Regenerative Leadership, and with John Fullerton, Regenerative Economics. I'm also with Joe Brewer in Design School for Regenerative Earth. And yeah, it's clearly female-led, these movements, which makes sense.
Yeah,
that's
very
awesome.
exciting.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off today. We're waiting for a few more folks to join in, but welcome everyone who's here to nRhythm's webinar on how to measure organizational health to unleash workplace potential. We have a fun session planned with a little bit of a preview of our organizational health assessment tool and nRhythm's philosophy and framing on monitoring health from a living systems view in organizations. Thank you all for being here with us today. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, share where you're from. My name is Tay Lottie. I'm based in Santa Cruz, California. It's a rainy day here today. I'm part of the nRhythm team and joined by a few other nRhythm team members. We have Jeff Sue here with us, as well as today's presenter, Fran Pretorius, and she's one of the OHA team members. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Fran, to kick us off today.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, so just give me 1 second. And here we go. And you will see that.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so welcome everyone. So glad to have you all here. This is our Organizational Health Assessment Informational Webinar, as Tay said. And the agenda for today, we have 1 hour together. I will share a little bit more about nRhythm and then try and answer all of the following questions. What is the OHA? Why do we measure and monitor health? How does the OHA work? How is the OHA different from other tools? How is the OHA different from the OHI? You might have heard of the OHI before. What is a typical timeline and process to complete an OHA? What is the cost and how do I get in touch? So hopefully I'll be able to answer all of that questions, and we will have time at the end if you have any more questions. It's a quick overview of nRhythm. As Tay said, we're part of an organization called nRhythm. It was founded in 2009 in the US as a regenerative organizational design and management firm. Today we have staff in 3 continents, and we work you know, and on 6 continents and all different sectors to address the world's most pressing social and environmental issues. Okay, so why you're here today? What is the OHA? It's short for an organizational health assessment. What is that? It's a comprehensive baseline tool that embraces interconnectedness and complexity to provide you with a holistic evaluation of your organization's health and regenerative capacity. So really, it's a reflective assessment tool for measuring and monitoring the health of a group of people working towards a shared goal. Now, that group of people working towards a shared goal is how we define an organization. It's really broad. It's any group, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, measuring and monitoring the health of a group of people. So why is measuring and monitoring important? In the picture, we see 2 siblings are measuring, you know, their height. So why do we measure and monitor things? So there are many reasons, and I'm sure I'm not going to touch on all of them, and feel free to add some in the chat. But the first is to create a baseline. Then to understand progress, to learn about and adapt to changing conditions, and to see patterns or anomalies to proactively address them. As I said, any other reasons you can think of, please add them to the chat. So what types of measurement and monitoring are appropriate? Of course, we get all kinds of measurement and monitoring methods. And it really depends on what you are measuring and monitoring. We like to think about measuring and monitoring simple, complicated, and complex things. So let's dig into that a little bit. A simple problem is like baking a cake. It has a list of ingredients, it's tried and tested recipes with known steps. For example, I used to live in Denver and it's high above sea level there, and I had to adjust the baking temperature and time a little, but it is a manageable effect that I can think about and I can adapt. Fairly easy to repeat, and the cause and effect is obvious. There's a single path, a single answer, and the answer is cake. Then a complicated problem is sending a rocket to space. Known inputs, design blueprints, there are known steps. You definitely need some experts to assist you here, but it is possible to create some repeatable results. There are multiple paths to a single answer. We know that there are many companies that have already sent rockets to space, but the outcome is the same. You want a rocket in space. A complex problem, on the other hand, is like raising a child. Each situation will be different. There are many inputs, unknown assumptions, unintended consequences. You can do the same thing, raise a child the same as the other, and the outcomes could be very different. Multiple paths, multiple answers, no right or wrong. To solve a simple problem or to work with a simple thing, you need a simple solution and a mechanistic approach, exactly measuring the ingredients. The same for a complicated problem because there are known steps to a single answer. And a mechanistic approach is wonderful for these types of problems. So let's think a bit about what are we measuring and monitoring when we are using a machine? Well, we look at productivity, we look at efficiency, we look at predictable outcomes. And this is great. If someone builds a car or if someone builds an airplane, I really want the machine to always be the same, have the same safety standards, have the same, it needs to be predictable. Fantastic. And having a recipe, having a blueprint for this is really great. But sometimes we use these metrics and measurements in, I think, the wrong context. So what are examples of metrics to measure productivity and efficiency in organizations? Well, we hear about profit per quarter. We hear about performance per employee. We talk about retention. We talk about income and expenses. None of those things are bad. It's good to talk about them. But there is this concept of time is money. And this is this person called Frederick Winslow Taylor, and he was an American mechanical engineer. And he's widely known for his methods to improve industrial efficiency. So really using the metrics that I just mentioned in a way that he applied to people. He was one of the first management consultants, and he applied this mechanistic approach to organizational management. And we argue at nRhythm that this is not the appropriate indicator for humans. Organizations made up of humans are complex, and therefore our approach should be a little bit different. Mechanistic thinking has its place, but it's sometimes applied incorrectly in organizations. So what do we think about? When thinking about complexity at nRhythm, we look at life as a model. Living systems are resilient and adaptable and allow for emergent outcomes. So our framework for managing complexity is living systems. And what do you look at in a living system? What do you measure and monitor in a living system? We say the primary measure of a living system is its health. And this is a framework that we put together looking at living systems design, which informs patterns and facilitates flexible frameworks and regenerates the living system itself. But as a machine design engineer's best practice, it enforces prescriptive structures and then degenerates the machine design, and then it requires more energy and external inputs to regenerate. Again, there's a place for each of these. We are saying when working with humans, it is really good to look at the health of an organization because that is a living system. So what are we monitoring in a living system? Nutrient cycles. If you think about your own garden, if you want to plant a flower and you plant the seed and the flower doesn't grow, you can't will the flower to grow. You can't make a pumpkin grow in your garden patch. You will look at nutrient cycles, water, energy, the soil, how much sun, did you plant it in the right place? Is it getting enough sun? Is it the right place? And you can also think about your own health. You go to the doctor, you measure your heart rate, your cholesterol, you look at all sorts of other indicators to determine your overall health, but you can't there and then change your heart rate. What you can do is you can change the conditions so that your health improves. You can work out more, you can eat more healthy, you can maybe take some vitamins. So all of these things point to a living system that we're working with. And in an organization, people are the energy of that living system. And therefore, that's what we need to measure. How are the people doing? What's the information cycle? What's the energy cycles? So at nRhythm, and I'm not going to go into this into too much detail, this is just for the people that have done some of our courses. We have our living systems framework here, which starts at foundational beliefs, operational identity, emergent outcomes, and this infinity loop. But throughout this, we design, manage, and monitor, and design and manage and monitor. So the OHA is really for the manage and monitor aspect, to create a baseline, to learn about what's going on, and then to monitor that and to see what needs to change in your, does your soil need some extra nutrients, for example? Okay, so for this, we have to manage and monitor, we have created a tool, of course, to look at our organizations, and that's called the Organizational Health Assessment. So how does this tool work? Well, practically, it's a 38-question yes/no online survey. And the questions are based on our living systems framework, and it's asked in different categories, including context, structures, work, energy flows, information cycle, and receptivity. All the responses are anonymized, it's strictly confidential, and the results are presented in the aggregate form. OHA links are sent by email to each team member. So that's just a quick overview. I will delve a little bit more into all of those as we go along. We believe that in order to change, the system needs to learn more about itself from itself. And this is a quote from Margaret Wheatley. And this is really what the OHA does. It helps us to reflect on where we are as an organization and think about our overall health and regenerative capacity as teams. Now, the OHA, it says Organizational Health Index, but as I said earlier, we define an organization very broadly. We have used the OHA with teams and organizations, of course, to discover underlying opportunities and challenges in the organization, to build effective and empowered teams of decision makers by comparing results across management sector segments and over time. But we've also used it with networks, associations, and cross-sector collaboratives to evaluate group dynamics and tensions in order to break down silos and design structures to foster long-term health. We've even used it with foundations and investment firms looking for an assessment tool to select and monitor organizations for investments or grants and build a diverse network of stakeholders and impact. And very exciting, we have used it all over the world with communities in more rural areas to galvanize around an aspirational purpose and quality of life, to engage and empower the community members within their rural or urban context. So what is measured? As I said before, we use our living systems framework to measure overall health and regenerative capacity in several categories within our framework. And then what comes out of that is we utilize the data from the assessment to generate comprehensive reports offering both a macro and a micro level insight into your organization's health. These reports include scores for each category, as well as an overall score and a trend score that forecasts some potential future states based on receptivity, and it informs proactive measures for redesigns. The scores are based on a numeric 0 to 5 scale, and it represents these 3 states of organizational health. It's either regenerative or transactional or degenerative. And then these scores come in 3 types of reports: a company report, an individual report, and a history report if applicable. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But now we've spoken a lot about scores, but really the OHA is more than a score, and this is really important. While the assessment itself is revealing and comprehensive, its true power lies in the meaningful conversations with a common language that emerge from the results. So by engaging with results, organizations can identify areas for growth, develop and foster a culture of continuous improvement. And through this open dialogue and collaboration, teams can work together to address challenges, leverage opportunities, and evolve together. The conversation part of this is so important because often we answer a survey and we feel one thing one day, and 2 weeks later, we might feel a little different, and that's okay. But we need to be able to have a conversation about that. Why did we feel like that day? Were we feeling uncomfortable answering the question? Were we in the middle of a really difficult situation, and therefore we answered it from that point of view? So the conversations are a crucial part of the OHA. Now, how is this different from other tools? Of course, we have, we all in organizations have some form of measurement and monitoring, and this often comes in the form of something like KPIs, key performance indicators, or performance reviews, or 360 reviews, or some progress tracking. And what we at nRhythm say is that this is not a replacement for those things. You can still have all of those traditional approaches. That's totally fine. But the OHA zooms out. It provides a holistic view of your organization's health and comprehensive understanding of its capacity for regeneration. Again, it's not a replacement, but it's an addition. For those of you that know nRhythm pretty well, we used to call it an OHI, an Organizational Health Index. We recently decided to change it to an Organizational Health Assessment. Index felt a little bit too focused on the scores. We feel like this is an assessment. This is a reflective assessment tool. So we feel like the single word change is a small change, but it's closer to what we believe the tool is. The main difference is the new one is more concise. It's more targeted than the previous version. Some of the previous versions were up to 80 questions. This one is just 38 questions. The second one is it's on a new and easy to use platform that allows our clients to view their results. It's an ongoing online place where you can go and view the results and play around with the results. I'll show you in a few minutes. And it's also expanded to include some equity questions. Similarities. It's important to note that the categories have remained the same. So this allows for comparison year over year. So if you've done an OHI a couple of years ago and you want to do an OHA now, it is absolutely possible for us to compare the results, so you can still have that history report and comparison to see how things have changed. And it's the same in-depth reporting. I actually think there's actually more in the reporting in this one. Okay. So a little bit more into the practicalities. What is the process? So if your organization wants to do an organizational health index, you would contact us. We would set up a discovery call where we would learn more about what your organization needs, who would be part of this assessment. Is it the whole organization? Is it one department? Is it one project team? Is it a network? So we would learn more. And then based on that discovery call, we would set up the OHA from the back end on our side, making sure that everyone gets the correct assessment and emails and all of those things. And then the assessment happens. Now, to answer 38 yes/no questions doesn't take a lot of time. 5 minutes, max 10 minutes. If you read every single description in a lot of detail, it doesn't take a lot of time. But of course, people are on vacation, people are busy. So we usually say 3 to 4 weeks. Is the window that we give organizations to allow the team to complete it. With smaller teams, it is possible to do it in a shorter time. We've done OHAs in a week, but I would strongly recommend that it take a little bit more time. And then after that, we do reporting. And with that, I say they're a workshop, but what we do is we usually facilitate a discussion with the leadership team to discuss what the results look like and how to share that with the rest of the team. And the follow-up is based on what the organization would like. So still on the practical aspect, what does it look like? Well, firstly, your team would receive a personalized email. Dear Francisca, valued member of nRhythm, you're invited to complete the OHA. A little bit more information. It's a longer email than this. And then at the bottom, you click Begin OHA. Then it takes you to an online survey. There's some information about about the OHA itself. And then there is different sections. It's just a single page that you scroll down and you just click yes, no. And at the end, you click submit. It's as easy as that. It is possible to do it on a phone. I think it looks better and it's a little easier on the computer. Then you get reports. Once it's done, you get the company, individual, or history report. These are screenshots from the reports. This is all online. So people get a link, they can click on that, and then they can look at the reports. So this is an OHA. This is actually an internal OHA that we did. We had the company reports provides you with a response rate. A response rate is a really important indicator to start off with. If you have a 50% response rate, then it's not an accurate indicator of the health of the organization, and that points to something else. You know, there's a lack of engagement, so that's something to think about. So response rate is what the company report starts with, tells you a little bit more about that. Then you get all your scores. You also receive some graphs. There's an average score for the company. There's average scores by chosen departments, and there's a drop down that you can play with. You can look at different departments. You can overlap departments if you want to. There's also a graph to look at tenure. So if someone's been at the organization for 3 years, you know, if there's a group of people that say there's 20 people that have been there for 0 to 3 years, then you can look at their answers versus people who have been there for 15 to 18 years. So there's a tenure graph as well. And then my favorite part about the company report is it really goes into the detail at the bottom. So it looks at every single question and it shows you the company average on the left. And here you can see we have a range. We have some regenerative scores, we have some transactional scores, and we have some degenerative scores. It tells you the percentage of people that said yes and no. And at the top, you can scroll through all of the different categories to look at each question. And really, this is where the rich conversations are. The conversation here might be something like, it's fantastic that everyone understands the purpose of the organization and they feel the purpose is very meaningful to them. Everyone said yes to that. But people feel a little bit differently about their quality of life in the organization. That's like 55, 45%. And something clear to discuss. And it can be anonymous discussions. Sometimes people want to speak up and say, I answered no, and this is why. This is the richness of the OHA. See, I still need to practice with the new acronym. There's also an option for an individual report. Now, what's really important about the individual report is that this is username and password protected. No one else can see the individual report. The reason for us creating an individual report is so that you can compare your own answers to the organization's answers. And if you're anything like me, then you forget what you said 2 weeks ago, whether you said yes or no to an answer. So the individual report looks very similar to the company report. And then there's a section where you can see what your answer was, and then you can see the most common answer and the percentage of colleagues with similar answers. So it's a nice comparison while you go through your report. Then, as I said earlier, there are history reports. Here you can see this organization did it in January 2022, November 2022, and October 2023. And they can nicely see what the scores were and yes, how things have changed. In the history report, we also have some fun graphs to play with, if any of you like graphs. So yeah, that is the history report. Then what is the cost? Well, the cost is tailored. Everyone has different needs. It depends on the number of employees, depends on the reports needed. It depends on other bespoke needs. And the cost starts at 3,000, but we can get in touch. Often we also bundle a bunch of services together. So just wanted to give a general outline of what the cost would be. And the team working on this is myself. I'm leading the organizational health assessment work. Rachel, she's unfortunately not here. Rachel's on her way to the US for our team retreat, which is very exciting. And then Trey is also working on this. And then, I mean, any of the nRhythm team members, Tay is on the call, Jeff is on the call, you can get in touch with any of us. I'm going to pause there and ask Tay or Jeff if you have anything to add to what I've said so far. Nothing. Okay, great.
Nothing to add. There's some great questions in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay, I'll take a look at that in a second. Let me open the chat then and stop sharing. Okay. Sorry, give me 1 second to take a look at the questions. Okay. Yes, we will share the slides. Absolutely. Pauline, is it possible to make sectoral comparisons? Do you mean like comparisons by department or different teams?
I mean, the performance of a company with other companies in the same sector.
Oh, I see. We haven't done that in the past, but that is definitely something we can look at. What this tool can definitely do is if you choose different departments or teams or different people in your network, then we can compare those scores. But we haven't done cross-sectoral comparisons that I know of. Jeff, have you done it in the past?
We haven't done that per se, but it brings up an a good foundational understanding of this tool, which is we don't view it as a objective benchmarking kind of tool, which means a 3.5 for your organization versus a 3.5 in another organization is not necessarily comparable. It is about what that number means for you in your organization and the conversations you have about it. That said, we have done a couple of sort of meta analyses where we've asked everyone. We had a farmer health index, for example, that we ran in both in New Zealand and one in North America, where we asked many farmers from the to answer the questions the same, and then looked at the kind of collective health of a sector, but not necessarily comparing one organization to another. So it's not a certification program per se. Yeah.
Thank you.
So some good questions. Caroline, I love all your questions. I'm going to answer the third one and then answer a couple more. And then I would like, Jeff, if you answer the first and second one of Caroline's questions, if that's okay. So Caroline's third question is, how do you handle questions about assessment fatigue? Now, this is a really good one, and this is absolutely why we created this next version of our organizational health assessment. Assessment fatigue is a real thing. As I said, this is a shorter survey. It's 38 questions, and it really doesn't take a long time. And we try and keep it as simple as possible by not adding open-ended questions, by not, it's purely a yes/no survey. And there's another question about yes/no. It was very specific. It's a very deliberate decision to make it a yes/no survey. We had it as a 4-point scale for a while, even a 5-point scale for a while. The problem with a 4-point scale is people either choose, they can go to the middle or to the end, but in the end, it ends up as being yes/no. And with a 5-point scale, some people just choose the middle, and we really want to force people to make a decision, a gut decision. It's actually in the instructions. Follow your gut here. If you're unsure, also say no. That's okay, because it elicits a discussion. This is not about getting the best scores. This is about making sure we have the important conversations to understand the health of the organization. Jeff, I don't know if you want to add something about the yes/no. Okay.
Nope. Good.
Yeah, I see there's a couple of questions about that. Okay, so Jeff, if you want to jump in with the two questions that Caroline asked. The one is, how do you make the business case to organizations about why they need to take a regenerative approach, and the struggles we have found in gaining tractions with this worldview? And then I'll take a look at the other questions and answer them after.
Sure. Yeah, great questions, Caroline. I'd say one of the reasons why we developed this tool actually is it's a great way to engage an organization in this worldview. So rather than say, hey, we have this new worldview that we really want you to engage in, it's to ask the question, would you like to know the health of your organization? I think most leaders of an organization would say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea to know that. So that's one very direct way. And then we definitely abide, in terms of your second question, we love the Buckminster Fuller quote that says, if you want to change someone's worldview, don't try to teach them, give them a tool through the use of which will change their worldview. So this tool is very much an entry point into a regenerative approach, into the idea of an organization as a living system, into the idea that you can't just push for productivity and efficiency. And it's a way to engage people in those conversations without having to say that upfront necessarily or explicitly. We've said it so in this webinar as a way to inform you all as potential users of this tool. But if you're a change agent in an organization, this tool itself is a great first entry point for that change. And I would add the other key doorway in is the idea of employee engagement and employee health. That one we have to be a little careful in that it's not specifically a human resource tool, and specifically about the health of, it is a big portion of it is about the health of people and their well-being, but it is about the health of the system, and it does examine structural aspects of the health of the organization, sort of not just the human resource angle on things.
There are aspects of the questionnaire that allows you to dig into a little bit more of the human resource aspect, but as Jeff said, it is more about the holistic view of the organization. Fayyad, yeah.
How are you? Sorry, I came late.
No
I
problem.
have a question about is this tool progressively? I mean, you can check the organization in a progressive way. This 6 months, later 6 months, or 1 year like this, or it is already better to make one time to say yes or no. They are already compatible with the regenerative principles.
That's a great question. Sorry, yes.
And second one, it will be more useful if we make, after the conclusion, we make advice from your side about the peer review from other organizations to advise the organization how to progress in their defects field or whatever like this. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. So just on the second one, the report provides quite a bit of details on how to think about the report and how to deal with the results. We also offer some specific and tailored workshops afterwards to help you think about and use the results to make some adjustments. And I'm sorry, I should have written down the first question. Can you just repeat that?
I mean, it is already a progressive tool. So
yes, I remember. Yes.
That after each month they can evaluate themselves, because Mr. I don't remember Mr.
Yes,
Jeff,
that's a great question. Yeah, I remember now. Sorry.
It is not comparable between the organizations. So I will compare to myself. So
yeah. So
if it is already certain questions, only 10 or 20 or 30. So it will be better to be 100 questions, so I can progress every month or every like this.
That's a great question. So we encourage organizations to do this depending on what works for them, once a year. Some do it once every 6 months, and they do the same questions. But we are working on having a secondary tool where you do the organizational and health index, and then there's clarity that you have some problems, for example, with the context part, and then you dig into that a little more, and we have more questions around that. So that is in the next phase. We're not there yet, but we definitely encourage organizations to do it more than once to kind of be able to compare results. Jeff, Tay, anything you want to add to that?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Jake.
Yeah, thanks. It kind of follows on from one of Caroline's questions about pitching to, I guess, to more mainstream businesses. But am I, without having seen the questions, I'm kind of guessing, but am I right that you don't explicitly talk about what the organization is in business of? In other words, how it makes its money. It's more an internal thing, but the outcome may support that kind of conversation if people wanted to go that way. It's kind of, is that about right?
Yes, yeah, that's totally right. We don't talk about exactly what the organization does, but there are questions that point to the purpose of the organization and the work of the organization that can lead to those conversations. And on that point, I'm happy to, I have some example questions that I can quickly share on the screen if people would like to see that. Okay, great. Let me share that.
And actually,
Jeff,
Fran, as you're doing that, Marianne had a question that I think relates to what you're about to show too, which saying, in addition to purpose, kind of what are the main categories of questions? So, yeah.
Yes, I saw that. So I think this will answer that. Can you see my screen? Great. Okay, so in context, you saw those two questions. You understand the purpose of the organization. Is the organization's purpose meaningful to you? Structures. Are roles and responsibilities clearly defined within the organization? Does the organization actively foster an environment that distributes power and decision-making equitably? Work is another section. Are the organization's current strategies and priorities in alignment with its purpose? Are your current work priorities clear and achievable? Energy flow is another section. Do you feel that your full potential is being utilized in your current role? Do you feel like you can be yourself at work? Information cycle. Can you be honest when giving feedback to team members? Does the organization foster an environment in which team members are encouraged to be open to opinions, mindsets, and ideas that are different from their own? Communication cycle. Do you have the information you need to do your best work? Are you timelessly and adequately informed about key strategic decisions? Network connections. Network we define broadly as anyone that interacts with the organization. Often it could be clients, it could be suppliers, it could be, yeah, it's a very broad definition. We provide that within the survey. So does the organization work to build mutually beneficial relationships with its network? Do you believe that the organization is a leader in its industry? And then receptivity, this is a section that looks at how open the organization is, open and receptive to change, as this can indicate what future organizational health assessments could look like. I hope that answers some of the questions. Great. Let me take a look at some more questions in the chat. Does the cost go up per participant in the assessment? We have different tiers of groups. So 0 to 20 is one cost, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 200. But again, we tailor this based on the needs of the organization. So it's just guidelines. Okay, what are the dimensions you ask about? I hope that answered, I hope the questions helped a little bit with that.
I have one question. Is it already tailored to the different discipline of the or different sectors, or it is already only one for all sectors or discipline like this?
Great question. It's one for all sectors. We are sector agnostic. We don't tailor it to specific sectors. Yeah. Let's see if there's anything else. I don't see any other questions. Anything else from anyone who wants to speak up? Elise, I see you're unmuted. Oh, okay, now you're muted. Okay, well, thank you for all the great questions. And of course, please get in touch if you have any questions. Before we end, I just want to hand it over to Tay to
Question
share.
from Tatiana in the chat.
Oh, sorry, thanks. What is our main approach to the dialogue afterwards? That's a brilliant question. So usually we have a meeting with the leadership team first to determine what the approach should be, because it depends on each organization. Sometimes the teams are small enough that we can just go in and we have a conversation with everyone. And sometimes there are dynamics to consider, and we need to speak with the leadership team first and understand the dynamics, and then we go in. So we've had all sorts of different approaches to the conversations. I've gone to clients where we would, you know, of an organization of 300 people, and we would meet with every single team and have a discussion about the results and have them workshop some things around that. We've had clients that really just want to talk with the leadership team, and the leadership team then decide at a later time and date to share the results with the rest of the team. So sorry, that's not a straight answer. The answer is really, it depends. Jeff, do you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add, if it's not obvious, that the approach is a very facilitated approach, right? So it's, again, it's not, if whether you're doing it yourself or you're asking us to come in, it's not sort of us as experts saying, this is your results. It is us facilitating your team to say, oh, isn't this interesting? Half of you said the purpose of the organization is meaningful to you, and the other half said it's not. Let's have a discussion about that. Or half of you feel you're thriving, or 60% feel, you don't have the information you need. And so it's very much facilitating conversations that lead to, obviously, some kind of redesign of things or some kind of reimagining of things, or looking for areas, and to set up a process then of how to redesign or rethink some of those areas of the organization.
Thanks, Jeff. And just to add on to that, just an example that I bring up often is we had a pretty large client do an OHA a while back, and a couple of the teams came back with almost perfect scores. Like everything was regenerative, everything was a 5, and we thought, wow, this organization is doing so well. And then when we went in for the facilitation, there was a palpable tension in the room. And someone was willing to speak up and say, we didn't feel safe enough to say no. And that was the beauty of actually going in and having this conversation and learning more about it. Again, there's no right and wrong here, as Jeff said. There's no, oh, this is your score, and therefore, X is your score, therefore Y needs to happen. That's not at all how we use this tool. So the rich discussions that flowed from that meant, something very different than what we initially thought was going to happen. So thanks. Inga, your question is great. Who is your main access point for this? Do you find HR leaders are your allies or barriers? Well, I've not had any problems with HR leaders. I've actually worked with a lot with the OHA. And then also just leaders going through, for example, our regenerative design lab or our leadership course have also been great allies in this. But Jeff, I'm wondering if you have other examples.
That's a great question. I do think it's useful, and we try to facilitate a pathway to the organizational decision makers, that because this does touch upon your structures, upon your mission, upon how is your work streams expressing your mission or your purpose. So if the expectations are, as I said before, sort of just about employee engagement, just about employee well-being, it quickly, the scope of it is much bigger than that. So we do try to ensure the team we're working with understands that, and there is someone within their structure that would have an eye to that, or a decision-making ability within that. But we haven't found HR to be barriers ever. Yeah. Probably in terms of barriers is where that wasn't the case, where the expectation was, oh, please, this is great, please do this because it will help with employee engagement. And then it comes back, the results come back with things that inherently are challenging to organizational structure or to the or how power and decision making is distributed in the organization. And then the hackles would come up saying, well, that's not what I expected. I didn't want you to ask those questions, right? That we have seen that kind of situation emerge.
Marianne asked, how do you demarcate versus other culture assessment tools? I would say, so we don't really, we haven't compared ourselves to other culture assessment tools. And I think this is broader than a culture assessment. It can be a good indicator of culture, but we really zoom out a little more than that and look at the context of the entire organizations, the structures that they build to facilitate work and health in the organization, and how energy and information flows in the organization. So it's a little wider than that. I do think in the conversations, culture can come out, and you can make some kind of assessment around that. But I wouldn't really think this is a cultural assessment. Jeff, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think I would say the same, that it encompasses, we certainly touch on many aspects of things that would consider to be culture of the organization, right? In terms of questions around diversity, equity, inclusion, questions around communication styles, questions around information sharing styles. And it's broader than that, in that it talks about overall structures and structure of the organization. So.
Any other questions?
Great questions.
Yeah. Some questions. Okay, I'm just gonna share my screen quickly again. 1 second.
Awesome. Thanks, Fran.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to get in touch, this is our contact details. Health@nRhythm is the organizational health assessment email address, and there's the team's email addresses. Just note that it's nrhythm.co and not .com. That can be confusing sometimes. Yeah, and thank you so much for all your awesome questions. Tay, it just has one quick message for everyone before we say goodbye.
Yeah, and I'll also drop in the chat. You all can read more about the tool and express your interest as well on this landing page I dropped in the chat. And I see so many familiar faces in the room who you all might already be familiar with our incubator program, but we do have applications open right now for the next cohort of our 6-month online program focused on growing organizations that are committed to transformative change by adopting this regenerative approach to work. And the first step in that incubator is an OHI. So an OHA is included in that incubator. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that in case you're considering applying to the incubator. Those applications are open until April 16th. Awesome. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll drop a
joining.
link to that in the chat as well. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jake.